22. Early in the afternoon, Helen returned to her room in Lavender Hall, one of the dormitories on South Hill. "You've got to take care of yourself," Professor Walton had insisted, and she obeyed like a good, dutiful daughter. Helen dropped onto the bed, stretched out, and breathed long and deep. She had been up since the early morning, assisting groups of new refugees in settling down within the campus. She had devised simple organizational games for women and children and had hugged and embraced dozens of young girls who had been ravaged by the Japanese soldiers. She was 3 months into her pregnancy. Even up to now, Helen hadn't experienced any serious, upsetting physical reactions, except for the occasional morning sickness. Jane, a good friend of hers who had graduated 2 years earlier and married a year ago, had had such a terrible time coping with her pregnancy. Jane would throw up so hard, doubling up as the nausea hit her as if she would choke to death at any time. Only after the 5th month or so did her condition seem to stabilize. Why was it that she was so lucky? Was it because she worked so hard? More than that, Helen mused. Growing up, she had been a tomboy, climbing trees, doing cartwheels. Her parents didn't believe in girls growing up like the character of Dai Yu in A Dream of Red Mansions, that weak, almost tragically sick kind of a feminine beauty so many young girls had loved to emulate. She had enjoyed all the girlish games, but her athleticism and rough and tumble nature had persisted well into her adolescence. "Look at your daughter, Hui Ping," the aunties and grannies in the neighborhood would all say to her mother. "Who want to marry her when she grows up? She's so wild." Her mother would smile knowingly. "She'll probably just stay with us and take care of me and Yao Guang when we get old, and not her in-laws." So much for tradition. Who wants to marry some dim-witted boy and be a slave for his parents anyway? While student at Ningning, Helen's academic interests had flowered. She had decided to major in education, but was also interested in social work and was equally strong in English, mathematics, Chinese, history, and social sciences. Also unusual was the way she would always look forward to the physical education classes with an enthusiasm that was very rare among her schoolmates. She was quite an accomplished athlete when it came to volleyball, badminton, and basketball. Though not particularly tall or strong, she was known for her quickness and agility. During her senior year, she was captain of the basketball team and led her teammates to a hard-fought victory over the faculty team. Her room at the college was small, with very little furniture and minimal decorations. As a student, she used to share a room with 3 other classmates, and there was always something to talk about. When she graduated with honors 5 months ago, she was invited to teach at the homecraft school. Now she had a room all to herself. Even though she enjoyed the privacy she now had, Helen missed the camaraderie of her classmates and remembered those days with a fondness. A single wooden bed nestled against the right side of the wall. Upon it was the handcrafted quilt of red, yellow, and blue, a gift from her mother. On one corner of the bed was a Cupid doll for a sewing project. While she was still in middle school, she was supposed to make dresses for this cute little doll with a porcelain head and curly golden hair. She had managed to make a jacket that more or less fit, but she was having a hard time trying to come up with a pair of matching trousers. "Why don't you try a skirt?" her father had suggested. She loved the idea and went about designing and making the skirt. The result was something bold and simple, a bell-shaped bag with both ends wide open. Dressed in those mismatched jacket and skirt, Her doll must have been the oddest-looking cupid in the world. To her little brother Dongzi, at least, it certainly was. Dongzi had laughed hysterically at the sight of the strange foreign doll, reached out to grab it, but instead knocked it to the floor by mistake. A crack across the doll's forehead was still visible despite the tresses of rich blonde hair dangling there. Right by the window was a three-legged writing desk with an antique-looking reading lamp that hadn't been used for about a week now. On a small table next to the bed was a framed wedding photograph. She, in her white wedding gown, more demure in appearance than her usual self, smiling warmly, and Peng Fei, the bridegroom, in a dark suit and tie, tall, handsome, grinning bashfully. On the facing walls were three scrolls painted by her father in watercolor, flaming bloom blossoms in early spring, tall, sturdy, yet delicate bamboo stalks caught in a winter gale, and a pink and white lotus flower solemnly in bloom upon a still gray pond, which reflected the misty gray sky awaiting the rain. Small as it was, her room contained almost everything Helen felt she really needed. Even Peng Fei, who had such a passion for the vast, endless spaces in the sky, hadn't complained about experiencing anything close to claustrophobia here. After all, he had already gotten used to being strapped in the tiny space of the plane's cockpit. They hadn't even talked about when and where to find a place to settle down when all this was over. They hadn't had the time. Even their wedding had been rushed. That was early August, when the Japanese warplanes began to fly bombing missions over Nanking. Reverend John McGee had just begun to say, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today at our Episcopal Church in the sight of God," when a heart-piercing siren wailed in the sky outside. There was a hushed commotion among the gathering of about 100 family members and guests. Helen's parents and brother, Peng Fei's brother, the best man, and his friends from the Air Corps, Professor Vautrin, and a number of other professors and friends from Jingling College. The pastor paused for an imperceptible second and continued, "To join this man, Peng Fei Yang, and this woman, Helen Chunling, in holy matrimony." When it was time for the groom to kiss the bride, the siren was still winning away. There was a commotion coming from the streets outside. Some of the guests toward the back of the church had already left. "I'll make it up to you," Peng Fei whispered in her ear after planting a quick kiss on her lips. She blushed profusely. Tall and handsome and a captain in the newly established Air Corps, Peng Fei had been the Prince Charming that frequented the dreams of many young women in Nanking. The boldest among them showered him with letters with their own photographs enclosed. Peng Fei had been flattered, but didn't let that kind of attention go to his head. He waited and bided his time until he had spotted her at a dance party at the University of Nanking. She hadn't gone to such parties often, and she wasn't the prettiest that Saturday evening. She was dressed in a simple short-sleeved white blouse and a black skirt, just like a typical female college student. And yet Peng Fei later told her there was something about her, a kind of quiet yet sunny vivaciousness which reflected neither the traditional Chinese girl's timidity nor the overtly modernized woman's aggressiveness that had attracted him irresistibly. And that was the beginning of a year-long courtship. "You are just saying this to please me, aren't you?" Helen had teased. "You want me to swear?" The young captain raised his right hand and said solemnly, "If I had lied, let me be hit by the 5 thunders of heaven." But Helen covered his mouth with her palm before he could finish. "Okay, I believe you," she giggled happily. Peng Fei was not exactly the kind of Prince Charming Helen had been dreaming of, busy with volunteering at the homecraft school for girls from poor families in the community, following her sports and other interests, as well as trying to stay on top of so many reading assignments from her professors. She hadn't had much time to form a clear picture of her Prince Charming, someone she would love to marry and to start a family of her own. That was all still too far away for her, and a young army officer was perhaps the furthest from her mind. So when she fell in love with Peng Fei, it was a gradual, slow tumble rather than a quick, precipitous plunge. Even her father, open-minded as he was, had cautioned her about a life with a military man in such troubled times. "See how much your mother has had to put up with me," the colonel had said, while walking with Helen and her mother around the Jingning campus one day. "But she's a very happy woman," Helen had retorted. "Right, Mom?" "Oh, yes," her mother replied. "I wouldn't trade him for anybody else in the whole world." The three of them had laughed. Helen lay on the bed and sighed. She turned on her side and pulled out something from under her pillow, a small diary. She had been keeping a diary on and off since her middle school days. It was an old book full of memories. She did not write it regularly, but only when the occasion struck her. When she was unusually busy, she would often forget about it for weeks at a time. She opened it and flipped through the pages. She stopped at the entry she wrote 2 years ago when she returned to Jingning after a 3-week winter break. February 20th. While the handkerchiefs were still waving farewells to Mom and Dongzi, Dad was in Shanghai. The unkind train sped along steadily toward Nanking. Traveling has always been exciting to me, but I have always dreaded bidding farewell to home folk. It is always such a heavy, hard event. At 5 o'clock we were finally at the journey's end, out of the carriage and within the college walls. Stepping into the dorm, I found a pile of letters waiting on my desk. At supper time, familiar faces met each other with mirth and friendliness. Bath taken and bed made, I threw myself drowsily down. The stillness of the room seemed to have sympathy with me. Helen read her awkward prose. Her English had improved so much since then. She turned to the next entry. February 22nd. My alarm clock woke me early. A solemn stillness reigned over the dormitory. Autumn Sound Hall. The rest of the girls were still in bed. The birds singing gaily gave me peace of mind. I rose immediately, washed and dressed. At 7 o'clock, I took a morning walk up on the hill to enjoy a deep intake of morning air. The misty purple mountain to the east was basking in the radiant glory of a rising sun. The charm from the skies seemed to melt my soul, though this appearance is unseen and unrevealed. The first chapel was conducted by the president and the dean. The classes were running on schedule. I turned over the new leaf of my schoolwork with this motto for my guide. Whatever I have tried to do in life, I have tried with all my heart to do well. Whatever I have devoted myself to, I have devoted myself completely to. In great aims and in small, I have always been thoroughly in earnest. She smiled at the thought of her own spontaneity in composing this entry. She turned a couple of blank pages and found the next entry. March 25. The birds are chirping in the trees and bushes, and spring seems to be well on her way. It is the time for our youth of feeling to shout out to the youth of nature, "Welcome!" The birds seem to favor our Jingning campus. In a few more days or weeks perhaps, magpies will be here making their rough stick nests on the top of campus buildings. I saw quite a few of such nests on the top of the science hall and the central hall last spring. Folks say magpies bring good, auspicious tidings to you when they sing on your treetops. Will they bring any more tidings of joy to us to Jingning the spring? Haven't lots of good things happened to us already? I've also seen doves or pigeons. What's the difference, anyway? Teetering on top of one of the buildings or flying overhead. Before I read the Bible, I didn't know they were in any way special. But now, whenever I see them, I feel a kind of joy that words fail to describe. And speaking of joy, I have to mention the skylark. It is small, almost dark, and plainly dressed, but blessed with a sweet, clear note which it utters while soaring into the sky. I've seen a few on the hill in the campus. We Chinese sometimes call it the messenger of heaven because its singing is so heavenly. And what did Shelley say about the skylark? Oh, I'll have to look it up later. Something about the bird being a blithe spirit, a cloud of fire, or a star of heaven. Isn't that something? She reread her prose. It seemed to leap up in bursts of energy. She flipped through more entries. She read her complaints of having too many assignments from professors who don't mind whether I have time to study or not, but they like to give quizzes almost every day, and of her club and social responsibilities on campus, and so on. There were Christmas and New Year's parties, and her social studies project. It was while working on this project that she had met Eva and Ningning. The two girls were much younger than she. When the three of them stood together, they were like do, re, fa, rather than do, re, mi. Eva, in particular, was quite mature for her age, but then again she had suffered more than most in her short life. There was always a melancholy look in her eyes, and an airy, almost otherworldly aura around her. Ningning, on the other hand, had a cheerful, sunny temperament. Even though she had seen Ningning no more than 5 or 6 times, Helen felt like she had known her all her life. In many ways, Ningning was almost an exact copy of herself 7 or 8 years ago. The last time Eva had brought Ningning to the campus, several of the faculty and staff who saw them all together had remarked aloud, "Are they your sisters?" "Of course," Helen had replied proudly, a wild smile on her face. Eva was now at the refugee center for campus. They still saw each other from time to time. But what about Ningning? Helen hadn't heard anything about Ningning recently, and she had not come to the refugee center. A sudden noise startled Helen out of her recollection. A thumping sound came from far down the hallway, and footsteps could be heard on the wooden floorboards as people ran outside. Helen bolted up and opened the door. There was a scream, then some shouting and yelling. Helen found her heart beating furiously. She rushed down the hallway and ran outside. A small crowd of people had gathered outside the hall. In the distance, Helen could see 2 Japanese soldiers struggling to carry off a girl. They were already at the side gate of the campus. "What's happened?" she asked breathlessly. "They have taken Eva," came the reply.